It was Christmas Eve in 1878, and it was super cold outside. The wind was blowing really hard across the flatlands of Texas. There was a small ranch house sitting all alone, with no neighbors anywhere close. Inside, an old rancher named Thomas Hale was sitting quietly next to the fire. Thomas had lost his wife, and life had been really hard for him. The fire was bright and warm, but it couldn't fix the sad, empty feeling he had inside. Outside, the storm was getting worse and worse, and the cold air was sneaking right through the walls of the house. Just as Thomas was about to put another log on the fire, someone knocked on the door. He stopped and listened. Nobody ever came this far out, and definitely not on a night like this. Then came another knock, even louder. This time, Thomas picked up his lantern and walked carefully to the door. He took a breath and opened it. Standing right there in the snow was an Apache woman. She had a thin, old blanket wrapped around her. Her dark hair was covered in snowflakes, and her eyes looked both scared and strong at the same time. "I need a shelter," she said quietly, and her voice was almost swallowed up by the loud storm behind her. Thomas wasn't sure what to do. He had heard lots of stories about fights between settlers and Apache people, and part of him wanted to just close the door. The storm behind her was angry and cruel. It wasn't going to let up anytime soon. After standing there for a long moment, Thomas moved to the side without saying a word. She walked in slowly, thankful but careful, like she wasn't totally sure she was really welcome. Thomas shut the door, and the loud wind dropped to just a faraway sound. She sat down close to the fire and held her hands out to feel the warmth. Thomas stayed on the other side of the room, watching her closely. She didn't say much, just that some people were chasing her and she needed a safe place to stay until the morning came. As the fire popped and crackled and the night went on, Thomas started to feel something change inside him. This was no regular Christmas Eve. The storm had done more than just bring snow to his door. It had brought him a choice, one that was going to test how brave he was, how kind he was, and maybe even fix a little bit of the loneliness he had been carrying around for way too long. Before the sun could even start to rise over the frozen land, the sound of horses came rolling through the quiet. Thomas jolted awake in his chair, his whole body on high alert. Across the room, the Apache woman jumped up too. Her face went tight with fear. She knew right away what was happening. She couldn't hide anymore. "They found me," she whispered, trying hard to stay calm, but her voice was shaking anyway. Thomas crept over to the window and peeked through the edge of the curtain just a little bit. He could see dark shapes moving around out there in the gray early morning. Riders, more than a few of them, moving slowly in circles around the house. Their shapes were blurry because of the last bits of the storm still blowing around. Trouble had shown up at his door, and it wasn't going to wait around. For just a second, Thomas thought about stepping back and letting things play out on their own. This wasn't his problem. He didn't owe her anything. But when he looked back and saw her standing there all alone with nowhere to go, something inside him just couldn't go cold. He didn't think about it anymore after that. He walked straight over and grabbed his rifle off the wall above the fireplace. He had spent a lot of years living out here on the frontier, and it had taught him a lot of things. But one thing he knew for sure was that sometimes a man just has to stand up and fight. And this was one of those times. The riders moved in closer. Their horses were breathing out big puffs of steam in the freezing air as they spread out around the house. One of the men shouted out, demanding that Thomas hand the woman over to them. Thomas walked right out onto the porch. The wooden boards groaned under his boots. He held his rifle steady and stood tall, facing all of them. His breath made little clouds in the cold morning air. "She stays," he said, calm and clear, and his voice carried across the stillness like a rock dropping into still water. He didn't sound angry. He just sounded like he meant it and wasn't going to budge. The men looked at each other, shifting around on their horses. They had expected him to be scared. They did not expect him to push back like this. A long, uncomfortable silence stretched out between them, and the only sounds were the horses moving around nervously as the wind died down. One of the riders nudged his horse forward, trying to get in Thomas's head and make him nervous. But Thomas didn't move, not even a little. He stood like a man who had already been through the worst thing life could throw at him and had nothing left to be afraid of. Little by little, doubts started creeping into the group of riders. This wasn't going to be easy, and it probably wasn't going to be worth what it would cost them. So, without saying a single word, they started turning their horses around. One by one, they rode off and disappeared into the pale, light-colored sky of early morning, leaving nothing behind but quiet. When he walked back inside, the woman looked at him in a way that said everything. Her eyes were full of thankfulness, and something else too, real, deep respect. As the first little rays of sunlight started coming through the window, the storm was finally gone. Two strangers who had started the night separated by fear and distrust were no longer strangers at all. They were now connected by one simple, but incredibly powerful moment of bravery and human kindness.